Welcome back to the Plants and Policies podcast, everyone. My name is Ina Toncescu.
And I am Maddie Youngman.
Today, we are going to reflect on what we spoke about last week and talk a bit more about the real life impacts of what adopting the Canadian Food Guide actually looks like. Previously, we discussed that Canadians need to eat more fruits and vegetables, but Canadians even afford to eat healthier? Since 2020, when our world went upside down with costs for food have never been higher in Canada. Canadians are very much struggling with costs not only associated with food, but other important pieces of their lives, like housing, for example. I think part of the public education campaigns we're trying to lobby for at CRFP, the ones trying to get Canadians to eat healthier, wouldn't be successful without also providing the tools for them to actually be able to afford said foods.
Exactly. So this is why it's very crucial to have policies in place that subsidize healthy, fiber-rich, nutrient-rich foods so that when Canadians make the decisions to purchase fruits and vegetables, more often, they won't be faced with the barriers of really high prices. So according to Canadian Grocer, Canadians are faced with stricter budgets as they contend with higher costs of living as rent continues to increase. Interest rates have risen and household debt is up. Canadians are also still feeling the effects of inflation and household expenses like rent and utilities. I certainly am, that are also increasing year by year. So Statistics Canada data cited in the report from Canadian Grocer found that Canadians reduced the amount that they were spending in food and beverage retail by 3.26% between 2022 and 2023. And I think this is really showing how, much we have to hold on because we cannot afford the foods that we want to buy. So we have to sort of
Mhm.
scale back a lot.
Mhm. And what are they scaling back on is my question. The Food Banks Canada's annual hunger count report reported on the issue of food insecurity with some really, really shocking numbers. The 2023 hunger count revealed there were nearly 2 million visits to food banks in Canada, a 32% increase compared to March 2022, and an even more shocking, a 78.5% increase from March 2019, the highest recorded level ever of food bank use in Canada.
Which is wild. I mean, this is purely because food insecurity across Canada is extremely high right now, and we're seeing really high levels of lack of food access. So,
Mhm.
in a study by Proof Canada, researchers from the University of Toronto found that in 2021, 15.9% of households in the 10 provinces that they studied experienced some level of food insecurity, and in the previous 12 months. That amounts to 5.8 million people, which includes almost 1.4 million children under the age of 18 who are living in food insecure households.
And when people are struggling to survive, the last thing they're thinking about is what is going on in their plates rather than if something is going on them. People are in survival mode.
Exactly. And we have been in for so many years, and it's just continuing to pile on. And I think we're sort of seeing like long lasting effects.
Mhm.
So when we introduce policies, ideas, and make statements like Canadians need to eat healthier or need to eat more plant based foods or nutrient rich, fiber rich foods, we have to really be cognizant and aware of the different experiences, such as those in marginalized groups, when it comes to food, affording it, and having access to it. So, for those who might not be aware, marginalized groups are often faced with food deserts where they cannot access healthy food options, or may be faced with food swamps where their options are limited to the most and unhealthiest foods like McDonald's or other sort of fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Um, so, these and other barriers really sort of keep people away from accessing really healthy and nutrient dense foods that they need.
Sometimes they don't really have a choice. Now, Maddie, does that translate for people even in Canada? I know there are a lot of documentaries like The Smell of Money, or they're trying to, and I'm going to spell this out, they're trying to KILLS, that have come out lately, really showing how BIPOC communities are affected by the current agricultural system. Is that also translating in Canada?
Of course, unfortunately. So marginalized groups are definitely affected in Canada on a really grand level. So for Indigenous peoples in Canada, for instance, the barriers of cost are much higher. So data from the First Nations Food, Nutrition, and Environmental Study shows that there's higher rate of moderate to severe food insecurity among Indigenous people, which is about 48%, living both on and off of reservations. Although people living in rural and remote Indigenous communities, especially in the North, are at higher risk, partly because of high food costs and transportation costs of food.
To be clear, 48% means 1 in 2 Indigenous folks are experiencing food insecurity. And these studies are also actually in the Canadian Dietary Guidelines as well, that completely recognize this status, or excuse me, the statistic. And Maddie, can we be optimistic about the latest studies that we're seeing? Based on a CTV news article, a new report predicts food products in Canada will have an average inflation rate increase between 2.5 and 4.5% next year, which actually does actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking about the fact that that's not even in line with people's raises, but 2 to 5, between 2.5 and 4.5% next year, down from the average 5 to 7% in 2023. And apparently, 2024 will be important because it is the first full year where prices are expected to normalize since the time. I just don't want to say this and happened a few years ago because the words are basically banned.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, we can find creative ways
Just
to talk about
we
this.
all know, okay? When we were all
Yeah, 2020. We all
yes,
know.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mm.
well, you mean, yeah, like you say, the sort of yeah, there are not similar increases in rent to the increase in food prices and inflation rate in general. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot of issues around that, but also, housing continues to rise, the cost of housing and people's rent go up all the time. And sort of those daily needs cannot be met, especially when food prices are going up so high and our wages are not sort of at that same level of when they're stagnant, I guess, or increasing very little. So I think what we're seeing right now with 2020 and this sort of CTV news article, um, there's that sort of plateau in prices, although there's still, 2.5 to 4.5% is nothing to sort of like shy away from. I think that that's still relatively a plateau in prices. And this is because over the last 2 to 3 years, the increases have been so dramatic. So it's sort of normal, I think, that they would plateau after a little while. I mean, um, this can be something that we can be glad to hear, but I think we should still remain cautious that these prices are extremely high and unaffordable, and that the average Canadian cannot afford these foods in the highest quantity that they would like to, or even to meet the Canadian Food Guide on a weekly basis. I know certainly I cannot do that. I sort of have to budget my way around what foods I buy, and certain fruits and vegetables I can only buy so often, if ever, maybe once a month, maybe once or twice a month, but they're also expensive still. And I would love to be able to buy certain things like grapes and strawberries more often when the season allows for it, but it's just not possible even in season with the two incomes for my household that we have. And I
Mhm.
think, when a bag of grapes costs over $15, I don't really know how to justify that when I could buy so much more with just $15 for something
Mhm.
else.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Now, I do want to switch the narrative a little bit, and I want to challenge the narrative we've put forth. And this might come as a little bit of a shock considering we're just talking about how people cannot afford to eat. But I want to challenge the narrative because I've sort of personally been able to do some pretty amazing meals with very little amounts of money. But there's a big distinction that I want to make. The distinction is that I am highly knowledgeable in micronutrition. I myself have gotten certificates just for the fun of it in nutrition, just so that I could be more aware of what's going on my plate. And so I'm going to challenge this a little bit. I do think a large part of the issue with the cost of groceries is what is being purchased and how it's getting used. I do know there's a lot of food waste associated with just not knowing what to do and then people getting busy and not having meal plans and things like that. Now, yes, my costs personally have gone up. I do want to say, like, no matter what, I'm going to the groceries and I'm getting 2.5 bags for every 4 bags I used to get. And I am privileged to be able to feed myself healthy foods every single day. I do have access. I do not live in a food swamp and I do not live in a food desert. And I'm not in an area where a lot of marginalized groups live. I do know how to balance my meals very effectively, though, cost wise and health wise. So, if you want to bear with me a little bit, and I know these are going to be, I'm going to throw some numbers here, okay? The prices I'm going to be using are from the Greater Toronto area in Canada. So, these will not apply to Northern Ontario prices where things are astronomically expensive. And they will not apply to Edmonton prices where Maddie is located because, as Maddie said, $15 in
A bag of
grapes, a
grapes.
bag of grapes. I was like, "What? I only paid 8." And then in my head, so that's already a huge distinction. So I wanna say that this may not apply for everyone, but I'm hoping that I can sort of drive home a small point, okay? Now, about to make a meal, so I'm gonna split some things. A pack of tofu costs about $2.50 out here. I split this into 4 meals, and Maddie's already
I'm
laughing.
like, $2. Oh my goodness. It's like twice that in
Twice
Edmonton, which
that.
is wild.
Interesting. Wow. Now, mind you, I do like to go to places where I can buy in bulk or I can buy on sale. I'm very cognizant of the sales that are happening as well. But for me, a pack of tofu costs about $2.50. I am just outside of Toronto, Canada. I want to say that because having a conversation with someone from Pakistan recently, I was speaking to her about tofu, and she asked me what I ate, and I said, "Oh, I pay, $2.50 for tofu." And she goes, "Oh, we pay about $12 Canadian for tofu." And I thought about it and I realized that entitlement that comes with the access to food is very visible when I say this because someone in Pakistan is not getting access to soybeans that have been fermented, somewhere close to them. They would have to be importing these products because soybeans are very easily accessible in North America, not the same thing in Pakistan. Now, so anyways, back to my theory a little bit. Pack of tofu cost me $2.50, and I'm going to split it into 4 meals because it's about 100 grams. Okay. That's about 8 grams of protein, by the way, believe it or not. Complete protein, by the way, all essential amino acids. Get some good calcium in there with a bunch of kale. I use a cup of that, and I paid about $2 for the kale, and that's a small bunch that I can probably do 4 cups worth. Numerous vitamins from 100 grams of a sweet potato. That's about a half of one, and I bought two for $2. And then a quarter of a broccoli head just to get some vitamin C, calcium, vitamin D, etc. Broccoli is just amazing, and everybody should be eating it. And I paid about $3 for that. And then put all of that on some rice after stir frying it in some spices and some garlic. And a cup of rice is what about? Probably less than 50 cents because you can get that in pretty big bulk. And then I've made 4 separate meals now for about $10, about $2.50 per meal. And I'm not saying for you to eat the exact same meal every single day. That's the whole point of balancing your micronutrition. But I come at it from a place of balancing that. Now, who is walking around in a grocery stores right now, picking a head of broccoli and going, "I'll buy this for my fiber and my calcium, and the tofu, I'll buy it for complete protein." Maddie Youngman's like, "Yes, I am." And Ina's over here doing the same thing. But I don't imagine most Canadians looking at a sweet potato and seeing manganese or vitamin A or copper or vitamin Bs. I don't see people highly tapped into what the nutrition aspect of foods are. When we say eating the rainbow, are we really talking about eating the rainbow? Do people understand what eating the rainbow actually is? And if you can really balance that on a more affordable level. So I know I challenged the narrative a little bit, but I think it's important to note that I think one piece of it, just watching my family go to the grocery stores, and my dad, one of his favorite things is to come back with rolls of phyllo filled feta with feta cheese. And, they used to be about like $5.99, $6 out here. They're now like $8.99, $10. And I'm like, you're not even filled after that. And it's literally just gross food, essentially. Um, it's a nice snack once in a while, but when you're buying eight of those because you want to freeze them for later, and then you're busy and you put that into the oven, that is not a balanced meal. And so we're not eating in line with that Canadian food guide. So imagine eating more in line with the Canadian food guide and skipping those things. But first, you must have the education part of what to actually put into your meal and what that'll actually result in as to put like why tofu, why kale, why sweet potato, and so on. But I'll stop
Mhm.
there. Thanks for indulging me in my tangents.
We love the tangents. The tangents are always allowed.
Yeah.
So kind of just to wrap things up, I mean, while prices of produce have been rising for a few years now, in 2019, researchers at Dalhousie estimated that eating in accordance with the Health Canada's most plant-forward food guide, which is our favorite food guide, um, it would actually save Canadians and Canadian families on average 6.8% relative to the previous food guide.
Mm,
So the sort of plant forward aspect of this food guide really is sort of highlighted in the savings aspect that you're kind of talking about, where if
mhm,
if we are able to adopt and implement these sorts of educational, nutrition awareness, then we can actually save a lot more than we, I guess, previously could have. So despite this, though, there's a perceived unaffordability among those who were surveyed, so about 26.5% in this study. So this was the most commonly reported barrier to adopting the new food guide, um, followed by a perceived lack of fitting with taste preferences, which was 20.2%,
wow.
lack of fit with dietary needs,
Mhm,
10.2%, which is quite low, but that's okay. And also the last one being it's too time consuming to follow. And I think that also sort of speaks to the education aspect
mm,
of it takes time to prepare and educate yourself or be educated with others. And my favorite place to do that is with others and doing it sort of as a community task or community event to sort of learn how to cook something new that might be cheaper and more nutritious and delicious with others and sort of building community at the same time. And that sort of helps you stick to it a little bit more
mm,
than I think you would
mhm,
have otherwise if you were to do it on your own. And you
mhm,
can kind of like let yourself slip a little. You're like, I don't really need
mhm.
to add that, or I don't really need to like do this again.
Yeah.
You sort of held accountable, and it's
Mhm,
a community building process. While also getting in all the fruits and vegetables that we sort of require and need to feel really good
mhm,
in
mhm,
our daily lives when things are can be so
mhm,
hard and so tiring and challenging.
mhm.
Um, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So you need to change perception, you need to have education, and definitely that community as well.
Mhm.
Now, these are really great points, Maddie. Let's leave it at that for this week. As always, you can reach out to us at hello@responsiblefoodpolicy.ca. And we will see you next week, same time at the Plants and Policies podcast, now available. I'm so excited. We're on Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Podcast Addict, iHeartRadio, and so, so many more. And thank you so much, everyone, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye bye.